Thank you. You can be seated. So today we have the great honor again. Woohoo! Door prize. Oh, Heather, we would like to have that purse. It's good we're a small group. We can find the owner quickly. So Callie Redfield is our speaker this morning. The majority of you may know her, but if you're new to Women in the Word, you may not have had the opportunity and the privilege to hear her speak. Very talented, very godly woman, knows her Bible so well. So we're really excited for her lesson or lecture this morning to introduce us to our Bible study. So she has been with Women in the Word for about 20 years. So long time, great commitment. Thank you, Cal. And she's been a leader, speaking and just helping us for about 17 years. Bob is her husband. She has 3 sons, none of them which live close, unfortunately, and she has 6 grandchildren. So her hobby, she says, is cooking and eating. Don't we all love that one, right? Especially the eating. The cooking we don't always like. I was told she has a revolving front door because she has lots of people coming and going from her place. Must be a wonderful hostess, right? So, and just on a sidebar, Callie was my very first leader when I came to Women of the Word 5 or 6 years ago is how long I've been here. So it was a great introduction and made me just passionate to be sure that I come every year. So thank you.
So, okay. Well, we are so excited to be starting up again. We are so glad that you are here with us. We are going to be studying the wisdom of the Bible this year. Now, historically, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job have been viewed as one wisdom unit. James is a New Testament book in the wisdom tradition. And we're also going to be looking at Jesus as the ultimate sage and the full wisdom of God. Now, while wisdom is concentrated in these sections, the strands of wisdom weave through the whole Bible, beginning with creation, going through the law, the prophets, the gospels, the church era, and even on until the end of time. So there's really nowhere in the Bible you don't find wisdom. But that does sort of raise the question of what exactly is wisdom? It's one of those sort of fuzzy words. Wisdom helps us answer the questions, how does life work? And how do we live life well? Ancient civilizations also had wisdom literature. And there are some similarities between their writings and the Bible, particularly the areas where they are looking at nature, consider the ant and that kind of stuff. We have wisdom literature. Literature might not actually be the right thing to call it these days. Our wisdom comes in the form of Dear Abby. The Sunday comics are sometimes very wise. And there is an array of YouTube influencers whose credentials may not go much past a lot of charisma and knowing how to make a video. It's really not terribly surprising that some of the advice floating around now on how to live life well isn't terribly helpful. Biblical wisdom is different, though, because it is grounded in the very character of God. God fully understands how everything works. He created it. He designed it. He is an authority that we can trust, even when his wisdom sounds a little odd to us. And wisdom is a trait that God shares with people. We can learn and we can grow in wisdom. It's basically the art of living a successful, morally good life in close relationship with God and with other people. It's the ability to know and to act on what is right and what is wrong. And it's the good sense or sound judgment that comes with age, experience, listening to God, and listening to other wise people. Now we're going to be studying Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job, and James. If you add those together, it's a total of 90 chapters. And if that feels a little intimidating to you, it was totally terrifying for we who write questions. It's like, wow. We are organizing James the way we do every year, chapter by chapter, verse by verse. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job will be handled a little bit differently. Um, for Proverbs, we gathered together Proverbs on certain topics, and we put them all on one sheet in the appendix in the back of your book. So it's going to look like this. And the page behind it is blank. So you can either go to, when you come to your lesson, you can either go to this and back and flip back and forth. Some of the editors who read for us said that would drive them nuts. They didn't want to do that. So then you could also cut it out and just have it in front of you while you do your lesson. Or I suppose you could even take a photocopy if you want and then keep it in your book and have it in front of you. In the lesson, it will say, turn to page something or other, and that's where you will find your Proverbs. Except for the minor fact, this falls into true confession, that I rearranged something in the appendix at the very last moment and didn't realize I was changing the numbers. So I trust that you guys are adventuresome enough and perseverant that if it says go to page 69 and you don't find it there, you will go to page 71 and you will find it there. So yeah, my apologies. And that was I have to own that one. I did that one. In Ecclesiastes and in Job, we have taken sections of the book that represent the larger ideas and the larger issues that they are wrestling with. And we know we're not going to get the fullness of what the whole book has. But we feel like what we have will allow us to honestly and fairly interact with the ideas that are in those books. Now, most of us haven't spent a lot of time in Hebrew poetry. It's not a genre we're really very familiar with. We understand history. We know how to read a letter. So reading the history and the letters of the Bible is pretty easy for us. It's pretty natural. Some people really like poetry, but a lot of us don't spend a lot of time in poetry. And English poetry and Hebrew poetry aren't identical. Our poetry tends to be based on rhyme and on meter, and it has a lot of imagery. Hebrew poetry tends to be based on structure, and it has a lot of imagery. But what was natural and normal in their imagery sometimes is a little bit odd to us. We live in very different worlds. We do have parallelism. They have a lot of parallelism. We have some, not as much as them. So we're going to look at some, but don't worry about the names. Actually, when I was studying, different books have different names for the same idea anyhow. But as you go through, particularly in Proverbs, ask yourself the question of what do these lines, how do they interact? What do they add to each other? So we have synonymous parallelism, and that's nuances of the same idea. It broadens and it strengthens one core thought. So here we have the dishonest man spreads strife and a whisperer separates friends. Not identical. And yet you can see the parallels and how they are adding to the picture. Whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit more than one who takes a city. So the second line is giving us a little more picture of what the first line is talking about. Anathetic parallelism is where there's a contrast. These are fairly basic ones. A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers an offense. Then there's synthetic parallelism, where the second idea builds on the thought of the first one. It might answer why, or give a result, or other things. But here, let your heart, keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows the streams of life. That's a why. Classic one, the Lord is my shepherd, therefore I shall not want. And that whole psalm is built around that idea. We also have parabolic parallelism, which is, there's a figure of speech in one line that is explained or complemented in the second. So, gracious words are like honeycomb, and then it tells us how. Sweetness to the soul and health to the body. And then I like this one. Isn't this a graphic image? Like a gold ring and a pig's snout is a beautiful woman with no discernment. It's okay. Got that one. So we will notice these a lot in Proverbs. But as you read, you will find this in Jesus' teaching, and you find this a lot in the prophets, which is interesting because there's a lot of poetry in the prophets. There is another structure which we are much less familiar with than parallelism, but it's very common in scriptures. It's called a chiasm, which is from the Greek word chi, or X. And it's because things come like this, have a center, and go back out. But we really see it more like that. In its simplest form, it's a ABBA fashion. So here we have whoever exalts himself will be humbled. Whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Exalt, humble, humble, exalt. These can get way more complex. So it's really kind of fun to watch. That website, I don't know if you can read that there, but that's Charlie Garrett's website, and it's Charisma Exchange. And if you go there, he has got all kinds of different places throughout Scripture where he's found these patterns and has them out. The next one that we'll be looking at is one from his website. He took this section in Genesis 3, and it shows us that it's not just in poetry. There's a lot of stories that are set up the same way. I added the color, and he took out some of the phrases so we could focus on the pattern. So this is obviously the fall. Eve ate the fruit from the tree. They realized they were naked, and they hid. And then you have the center line. This is very common, is that right in the middle, there will be a phrase that draws everything together, or is sort of a key idea. And here, it's that the Lord God called Adam and said, "Where are you?" So God is reaching out to his disobedient and hiding children. And then we follow with the same pattern. I hid myself. Adam says, "Well, we were naked." And God says, "How did you know that? How did you know we were naked? Have you eaten of the tree?" So we have eating of the fruit, naked, hid, naked, fruit. So we have that kind of pattern that flows. And one of the things that's real different between Jewish poetry and our poetry is that, or not just poetry, actually that would be writing in general, I guess, is that when we were taught how to write a paragraph, or the classic one-paragraph essay or one-page essay, you start with your thesis statement, you build your argument and have your supporting information, and then you close with a summary or a restatement of your thesis. So if you're kind of in a hurry, you just read the beginning and the end, right? And keep going until you find what you want. The critical, important parts in these chiasms is going to be right in the middle. So as we read, pay attention to more. That's not just what we'd study here, but as you read, pay attention to what's in the middle. There is another pattern. We're actually going to see this one later when we study too, that shows up frequently. And this is kind of an A-B pattern. There we go. This is from Proverbs 31. And in this case, the A's are commands and the B's are benefits. My son, forget not my law, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and long life and peace shall they add. So you have your command, and then you have, this is the result. This is the benefit. Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them to thy neck, write them on the tables of thy heart. So shall thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and men. And it goes on, trust in the Lord with all thy heart, and lean not to thy own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and the B, he will direct thy path. We're going to be looking at Psalm 145, and it will have a similar pattern to this, but the A's are praying to God, talking to God, and the bees are talking about God. So we will be looking at this kind of a pattern in a different format. Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes are all about wisdom, all about life. But they have a very different feel and they have different messages. And yet they stand united as a unit. The Bible Project does a really good job of showing us why we need to study all three of these together. Because some are actually, Proverbs is much more fun to study than Ecclesiastes and Job sometimes. But we need them all. So we're going to be watching that now, so you can settle back and enjoy.